good morning. You should be watching this video after you've already watched the video that was created with today's announcements for Monday, November 9th, as well as an explanation of the Beowulf projects that are going to be due Tuesday, November 17th. This particular video I made separate because I wanted it to be focused specifically on the content of our study for the next week or so. We're going to be doing an extension unit of sorts in which we're going to break away from the British literary canon for a moment, but to explore a similar theme that we saw in the Anglo-Saxon unit. However, this case will be in French literature in a very famous story known as Les Miserables, written by Victor Hugo. Okay, that French title means the miserable ones. Okay, it's an incredibly iconic piece of literature that is quite big to read, so we're going to be studying it in another adaptation, but you'll see that much of the work that we would do with the actual reading of the text will be applied to our analysis of it thematically and also in terms of character development and its relationship to what we've read so far in the Anglo-Saxon unit. Okay, for this particular study, you're going to see that there are two documents that we're going to work with today. The first of which is some notes on background and historical context. And the second item is going to be an anticipation guide that's going to prepare your minds for some of the themes explored. If you can recall, we did this similar activity at the beginning of our Beowulf study. Okay, and these are great opportunities to kind of personally reflect and to prepare you for the nuts and bolts of what actually happens in terms of plot, character, and theme development in this particular story. As a note, you're going to see I'm going to present to you the information that's going to go into the guided notes for this section in a moment, but the anticipation guide is something that in order to earn full points, you need to make sure your responses are the length that are asked of you in the directions. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to see if I can make this screen a little bit bigger. Yeah, that didn't work. Okay. I'm going to make my face disappear. I'm sure you'll be sad it's leaving. Okay. Okay. So Les Miserables, we're actually going to be studying a film adaptation of this. You may have heard of the story because it's a musical. However, we are not studying the musical version. I find that people are either musical people or they're not, and so they can't get past the idea that people are singing some things in the storyline. And ultimately, I think what you'll find is if you enjoy the story, you'll find the musical far more interesting, or far easier to understand than you will if you just had just the musical itself. All right, so our goal here is to take some guided notes on the context of the French Revolution. And then what we will be doing is a film study as we get through this final main week of the marking period. And you will have questions on a viewing guide that we will be doing on each day, okay? I will be recording the film and my version of it each day so that even if you are home for the day, you will be able to watch it and watch the section that I've assigned you that day along with the assigned questions that will go in the viewing guide. The essential question that goes with this is what events or circumstances shape one's sense of right or wrong? Because you're going to see that's one of the central ideas and focal points for Victor Hugo in this particular piece of literature. Now, just for context about location, okay, you can see that we have been studying, the United Kingdom, specifically England down here. You can see that France is located just below the island of England, the island of Great Britain. France, if I kind of show you this reference on a timeline of where this falls into our study of British literary movements, we just finished the Anglo-Saxon period, okay? We did our exile poems, we did Beowulf, okay? And so for that reason, you're going to see 1066 is a breaking point. And the reason 1066 is a breaking point is because the medieval period of the British literary history is in 1066, the French actually invade England, in what's known as the Battle of Hastings over a debate over who inherits the throne. And we will talk about that when we get to our study of Canterbury Tales. We are actually going to fast forward a bunch of years, though, okay, to do the study of Les Miserables. So we're actually going to skip this medieval period in our minds and skip the Renaissance period. But it's going to bring us to 1786 in French history, okay? So the French have a king, King Louis, and he has found himself in quite a lot of debt, okay? He has done a lot of extravagant spending. He also played a role in helping to support the American Revolution. He needs this money, and so what his money manager does is he proposes a land tax that everyone would have to pay. Before this, only what was known as the Third Estate, which is one of their social class divisions, paid taxes. All right, this bolded underlined part here is where you're going to see a correspondence with the note here. Okay, you're going to see, oh, there it is. Okay, so you're going to be following along, watching this video to get these notes. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. It might be wise to open this video up in a separate tab so you could do a side-by-side. Now, to get this support and to avoid, and I'm going to talk about those estates in a minute, but to avoid a revolt from the aristocrats or the upper class, Louis calls for what's called an Estates General meeting, okay, to be held. And that's basically a meeting of the three major groups of the three major social classes that are operating in France at this time. Now, it had been quite some time, over 100 years since such a meeting had been called in France. Now, the three estates of French society included the nobles, those are the aristocrats, okay, the clergy, which is another fancy word for the church, and then the third estate was just the common folk, okay. Your everyday people. If you weren't nobility, you weren't part of the royal, lineage and nobility, and you weren't a member of the church, you were just considered like the common folk. Now, if you want to look at this breakdown to understand how French society was made up at this time, basically 27 million people made up the third estate. It was most of the people. All right, the nobility made up about 1,200, 20,000 to 350,000. Okay, royal nobility, the lords and ladies. Okay, and then the clergy, all right, is the smallest group. But I won't make this case to you. The church often holds the most power in these countries at this time. All right. I recognize that this graphic is a little bit blurry, but what you'll see here is that if you take a look at the population, most of the people were the commoners in this particular, society at this time. However, you could take a look at government taxation fully fell on the commoners prior to this, which was a burden that the commoners did not, they were not okay with that. France's population had changed considerably since the last time an Estates General meeting had been held, okay? And those non-aristocratic members now represented 98% of the people. However, those other two groups, the clergy and the nobility, could outvote them 2-1. All right, there was also something called a noble veto, which meant that the nobility and clergy would team up, all right, to outvote the third estate because they ultimately thought their opinions were worth more. They were more upper class. Now, the Estates General itself, before the meeting, the members of the third estate, so your commoners, your non-nobility, your non-church, began to gather support for equal representation in the government, that there was not going to be any more this opportunity for a 2-1 vote. And they also wanted to get rid of that noble veto. They wanted voting by head count and not by status. So, like, your voting weight would be more related to the number of people represented, not necessarily by your status. By the time the meeting came around, it became more and more about voting than the actual land tax than King Louis had held this meeting for. So, he didn't really realize what he was getting himself into when he organized and held this Estates General meeting. One notable thing that you should know about French history and French Revolution history is something called Bastille Day. Okay, in 1787, rioters stormed the Bastille fortress in an attempt to get gunpowder and weapons. This was a rebellious act that many believe they mark as the start of the French Revolution, where the people kind of revolted against, the other two estates, in a sense, to gain more power. I know I've talked about this, but if you're someone who has watched the musical Hamilton, this backdrop of the French Revolution is pretty key, and through the character of Lafayette, if you're familiar with that. All right, this piece of artwork is a pretty famous one from the French Revolution. All right, now the outcome of the French Revolution was pretty tough, though. So let's see if I can get this to play. I might have to go out. Let's see, I'm reconnecting. It's gonna work. I might have to attach this separately if the internet's not working properly today. Let's go back to, okay. I'm gonna go back to that kind of rule about the guillotine. The French Revolution was based, I'll summarize it in a minute, really was based on a lot of the same democratic ideals as the American Revolution. However, the outcome was not that orderly. There was basically a grab for power after the monarchy was overthrown, and a lot of kind of violent dictators vied for power. The guillotine was very popular at this time. Again, I'm probably going to attach this link separately since the internet's giving me issues here. Okay. So, thus follows the Reign of Terror. Okay, so radicals basically overthrew the monarchy, had many beheaded. Okay, but there was a period of chaos and fear that followed this, led by people like Robespierre. Napoleon, who had been leading the army at the time, ultimately came back in through a series of events, declared himself as emperor. And when he was exiled, the monarchy was eventually restored through a series of events to King Louis Philippe. Let's see if this plays now. Come on. There we go.
The French Revolution, the emergence of the modern state. So, how did this all begin? For hundreds of years prior to the revolution, French people, like most Europeans, were divided into three social estates: clergy, nobility, and the lowest estate, the commoners, which existed to serve the other estates. Above all was God's gift to mankind, the king. But this hierarchy was being questioned by the Enlightenment, a movement of intellectuals who promoted the use of reason and science. Revolutionary ideas began to spread to the public. So, in the 1780s, when an economically broke and spoiled monarchy tried to increase taxes on the commoners, resentment reached a new level and riots began. On the 14th of July, 1789, revolutionists stormed the Bastille Fortress, a symbol of the royal power. This date is marked as the beginning of the end of the old monarchy, has become France's Independence Day, even though the king was beheaded only in 1793. Shortly after, the French adopted a universal declaration which stated, "Men are born and remain free and equal in rights." This was a radical change, even though it left many people out. But the French Revolution was far from a smooth ride. Actually, it was a bloodbath, which led to
I'm going to have to attach that separately because it does appear we're having some issues with internet right now. Okay. So, all that to say, through a series of events after the French Revolution, the monarchy ultimately gets restored. Now, that kind of leads us to the point of reference we have for the story of Les Miserables. Okay. There's a person by the name of Jean Lamarck who had been a military hero of Napoleon's era who was opposed to restoring the monarchy. After all that drama of the French Revolution, he had been a very popular oppositional leader. Just as it does in the novel Les Miserables, there was Lamarck, after his death, a lot of resentment and fear swelled. Okay, opposition groups felt like they had lost their hero. Many, especially supporters of the Republic, were bitter. They felt like the revolution of 1830 had been stolen by them, by those who wanted Louis Philippe to be the king again. And so they organized what's known as a June Rebellion, which is going to serve as a very key scene in Les Miserables, both the novel and the film. There was a June Revolution battle that was just over 24 hours, okay? It wasn't that noteworthy, but Victor Hugo does use it as a central point of climax in his novel. Ultimately, 800 protesters were killed or injured. The king continued to reign for another 16 years. This little revolution that was based around Lamarck's funeral had accomplished very little. In fact, many people will argue that it largely would have been forgotten if Victor Hugo had not chosen it to set a major scene in the story we're about to study. Now, the central message in Les Miserables, there's a couple that I want to explore, present to you going into this so your mind's prepared. Hugo uses this novel to condemn the unjust class-based structure of 19th century France. He shows that time and time again, society structure, the way it's set up in the three estates and the way things are configured within those estates, that it turns good, innocent people into beggars and criminals. Okay, and you'll see that explored through the main character, Jean Valjean. Another area that he focuses on is reforms, things that he believed need reform in the French culture. Education, criminal justice, and the treatment of women. And you'll see that largely through the character played in our film depiction by Uma Thurman. She plays a character named Spontine. Though Hugo's sympathies are with the Republican movements rather than with the monarchy, he ultimately is critical of all the regimes that have occurred in the since the French Revolution because of their inability to deal with social injustices or to eliminate the rigid class system. So a little quick who's who for who you're going to start seeing. All right, Jeffrey Rush is going to play the character of Javert. Javert is a member of law enforcement. Okay, he is a prison guard in his early history, and then will proceed to being a police captain in a town known as Vigo, which is a town not in Paris, outside of Paris. He will eventually move up the ranks to Paris. Jean Valjean is played by Liam Neeson. He is going to be the central protagonist of the story. Javert will be the antagonist. Valjean is, at the start of this, being released from a 19-year sentence. He had been put in there for theft, however, had tried to escape a few times, which prolonged his time in prison, in the camps, all right, where they did hard labor. He, after a gesture of mercy from a member of the church, redefines his life and is very successful once he has redefined his life, but has to face his past. All right. Oh, Fantine's picture's not there. I just had her here. This is Fantine. She is actually someone who works in Valjean's factory once he is established and redefined his life, and her story is quite sad. All right. She's one of our other main characters. All right, so those are your notes. You're going to want to make sure that these background notes are completed. You should have had corresponding bolded and underlined sections for each of those. The remainder of your time today is going to prepare your minds for some of the thematic ideas in the text. Okay, and to do that, you are going to see areas where you will put whether or not you agree or disagree with each of these thematic statements. And then in part B, you're going to respond in at least 3 complete sentences for each of these items. Okay. Please don't put, I don't know. And if you do put, I don't know, offer an explanation of maybe how you think you would react to one of these situations. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow.